but it was clear as clear could be. God wanted me to go to that ministry. I mean, it was, and again, I can't explain how God deals with me, but he just, that's the way he does. He smacks me, and it's up to me just to yield. And so I picked up the phone almost immediately, and I called the director of the sailor ministry at that moment. And I've never called him before. I don't even know how I got his telephone number, but I suppose it was in the book. I don't know. But I called him, and he answered the phone, which was kind of amazing because it's a Saturday. It's when their ministry's going, but he was at home. And he called, and he answered it, and I told him, I said, I believe God wants me to be in the sailor ministry. I knew they were very selected. They weren't just an open door, just anybody come in. They pretty much, the whole world knew that they would select people to come into their ministry. And I said, I believe God wants me to join you. And he again, just kind of laughed, giggled on the phone and said, and I thought, that's strange. And he said, I believe God's in this. He smacks me. And well, I knew God was in it. You don't have to tell me that, brother. He done told me to immediately, and I called the director of the sailor ministry at that moment. And I've never called him before. I don't even know how I got his telephone number. Saturday, I went to that ministry. That's in, like I said, late February, March, something like that. And he answered the phone about ministry. I didn't know what you did. I went into it, and I just started getting sailors and started bringing them down. Not going to go, the whole story there, but in August of that year, that leader left. He was resigning, going to go pastor a church, and I got a phone call from our preacher, Dr. Howells, and I got called in and told that they wanted me to take that ministry over. Now, there have been guys in there in that ministry for 3 and 4 or 5 years. I've been in it for about 5 months. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know how it ran. I didn't know where we got our bus. I just went and got on it. I didn't know who drove them or I didn't care. God told me to go. Every Saturday I'd go get on a bus, go get sailors and come home. Now, God called me to that ministry. Now let's back up. I had a little bit of a talent. I don't have talent in a lot of areas, but I had a talent in athletics. Now, God called me to this ministry that I didn't even understand, but then in that ministry, He allowed me to use my talent to win thousands of sailors, because that was our whole promotion, was athletics. Playing football and playing basketball and playing softball. And I was 32, 33 years old, and I'm playing with 18, 19-year-olds, but I was still better than they were. And so, I had a talent, but I didn't live my life. I gave up all athletics for 5 years after I got saved. I didn't touch a ball for 5 years because I just thought that's a part of my life that's got to go. That's no part of me. My whole 4 years of college, I wouldn't play anything. I didn't play in intramurals. I didn't play anything with anybody because I thought that's a part of me that's got to go. But that was a talent God gave me, but He didn't give it to me to play ball. He gave it to me when I surrendered to do what He called me to do. And He let me use it in that ministry for the next 20 years. Does this make sense to anybody? So the fact that you may have a talent, that we don't just say, oh, well, I must do this because I have an ability. No. You got to make sure, what does God want you to do? And can I tell you, you might have to give it up for 5 years. You might have to shelve it for 5 years. Be honest, Brooke has a talent musically. But she spent about 10 years total in Africa where there's no piano. You don't play the piano in the village. There's really not much singing in the village. You'd think, okay, God, are you confused? You gave her this talent. She's got to be able to use it. Well, in many ways, she has been able to continue to use it just through our music and different things. But I think I'll help you with that here in just a minute. Now, Paul was clear about what his calling was. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 6 and 7, here's what his calling was. He said, I have planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. So then neither is he that planteth anything, neither is he that watereth, but God that giveth increase. You see, here we see Paul, and Paul said, I'm a missionary. I'm a planter. God sent me to go where nobody's sown seed before, and he sent me to go sow the seed. And he said, you know what? I'm not really going to be able to stay there to do much to see them grow. Now, there's some people, that's what God called them to do. Go reach them. Reach as many as they can. And he said, God called me to plant. And then he said, but you know, what did God called Apollos to water? I used to tell my wife all the time, she would just get so frustrated because every door she would go to, when we go out soul winning, if you ever go with her, you'll find out just 99% of the doors she goes to, if she gets on a plane, wherever she goes, the person beside her, the person she talks to, they're going to be saved already. They're already saved. She always gets frustrated. You go to the door, you win people to the Lord. I go to the door, they're already saved. Watch this. They're already saved, but every time they open up to her like a book because they got some kind of spiritual need. You know what? God called her to water. She's a waterer. I'm not. I'm more of a planter. God called her to water. Now, does this make sense? Oh, do you understand how hard it is to speak to you? Man. All right, thank you. Just groan, grunt, something. Now, what we see here is this shows Paul's humility and Paul's desire to preach the word to those who have never heard, and his understanding of his calling. Paul was willing to work. You know, Paul had all kinds of, he's very educated. You'd think with his education, he would be the man to water. You think about it? His education, he'd be the discipler. No, but he's not. He's the waterer. I mean, he's the planter. Now, so being obedient to the calling was more important. This is so vital. Being obedient to the calling was more important than fulfilling the desire of his heart or fulfilling his talent. Now, verse 22. He says, for which cause also I have been much hindered from coming to you. So he's saying, look, God called me to go plant all over the world in places nobody else has been. And watch this. He said, I want to come to you. Now, you say, now how does what he's doing, his calling, keeping it from them? Watch it. He's supposed to go to places that nobody else has planted. He can't come back to them because he's already been there to them. So God is delaying him coming to them. The great desire to preach to those who had not heard, maybe I should say, listen to this, it's more than a desire. It's a compelling to follow his calling is what kept him from coming to Rome to preach to them again, to be with them again. He was compelled to do what God had told him to do. Folks, if we could just have a group of people, if people could just get to the point, God, I don't have to do what I want to do. I don't have to do what I desire to do because it feels good to me. And listen, you know what it is, folks? All of us want to be successful. Anybody here want to be successful? We all want to be successful. So you know what that makes us do? That makes us go to that what we're good at. Do you understand that forgive me, but I used to tell Joe Beth every once in a while, I'd come home and from playing about 3 or 4 games on a Saturday night with sailors and preaching to them till midnight and see guys saved, and it was a wonderful thing. And I'd say, sometimes I'm not sure I even like playing sports. I'm really not sure I even like doing it. You say, why do you do it? Well, because it's a talent, but I have to be honest. It was something I was good at. And it's something that feels good about doing what you're good at. And so we have a tendency to be drawn to what we're good at. But sometimes God says, listen, I'm not concerned about what you're good at. I'm concerned about you yielding to me and letting me do what I'm good at, which is everything. Does this make sense? God tries, He's wanting us to yield to Him and do whatever He wants us to do. So, and I'm trying to, it's a hard thing. It really is a hard thing because we want to be successful. We hate to fail. And can I tell you, when you do what you're good at, you fail less than when you do what you're not so good at. But sometimes God calls you to do what you're not so good at. You know, again, when He called me to take over the sailor ministry, I came in that first Saturday. Now, the guy that I was taking his place, I've spent my life taking the place of people that were dynamic, that were really good at what they did. I mean, if I went back into history, I could name names of people that were incredible at what they did, and here I come along. The guy took over for the sailor ministry, Larry Bullard. He had preached. He was so dynamic that the year before he left, he had preached 9 times in pastor school. Anybody remember what pastor school? Y'all too young. You don't even know what I'm talking about. But to preach once in pastor school was like the opportunity of a lifetime. He preached 9 times. 9 times. He spent his whole Saturday in about a half dozen different ministries going and lighting up everybody. Getting them all excited about soul winning. Getting them all excited about, he had a 7:30 meeting with the sailors and he'd walk in, hey! I walk in at 7:30 like, oh man. Totally different individuals here. And I knew I was not good at this. I was scared to death. Now, it would help things immensely was on my way, I got out of my car, and before I got into the meeting, I'd only been in the ministry 5 months now. Before I got in the meeting, 5 different men who were members of that ministry stopped me before I could get in the door to let me know that they felt like Brother Howes had made a horrible mistake, that I was the wrong guy for the job. 5 different ones told me. Every one of them, I would say basically the same thing. They would say, you're not the right man. I don't know what he's thinking. I don't think you should be here. And I'd look at him and say, I agree with you. Thank you. I agree. I think it was a bad move. God bless you. And I keep walking. And I walked in and I told them, I said, listen, fellas, let me just tell you what you're all thinking. I'm not the guy to do this. I don't have the ability to do this. I don't even know what I'm doing. But I know God called me to do it. And if He called me to do it, He will enable me. So you take it up with God, because He's the one that called me to this place, to this moment, and this time, and He's the one who will enable me. So folks, please, when God directs you, He won't necessarily direct you to do something that is in your talent. Okay? But He might call you to do something that you're not good at. Verse 23, but now having no more place in these parts and having a great desire these many years to come unto you. God was going to finally allow him to go to Rome. His work was nearly done in this missionary endeavor, and it was coming to a time to go to Rome to see them. Now, I'm again, and most of my illustrations, I just, I got a million of them because I make them up. But you didn't catch that, did you? No. But as I thought of this, I thought, Lord, this is a little bit like us. Yeah, I almost feel at times this is what God did with us. God kept us away from home until our work was done. And then He allowed us to come home. I believe that this is one of the ways that God blesses faithfulness. He will sometimes allow us the desire of our hearts. Proverbs 28:20 says, a faithful man shall abound with blessing. And I want you to understand, I'm not claiming to be a faithful man above anybody else. But I do believe that God gave my wife and I a desire. And in that desire, and I think in many ways it was probably more her desire than mine, a desire to be home, a desire to be with family in the final years and days. Our desire, whether y'all can understand this or not, understand what I'm saying, we had a strong desire to have a people to love. We had traveled, and the last few years of the college, it seemed like our opportunity to have this had diminished. And as we traveled, we'd go and we'd meet people, and we'd be with them 3 or 4 or 5 days, and we would fall in love with them, and we'd leave them and realize we'd probably never see them again. And that was a hard thing. We had our sailor ministry families, 20 and 30 families that would work with us for 3 and 4 and 5 years, and they would be our family. It was just, they were ours. I had one of them call me just a couple of days ago, and they wrote me after I gave him a little bit of counsel, and his wife wrote me back and said, thank you. You're the only dad that me and my husband have ever had. But I believe after 30 plus years, where we just said, God, this is what you called us to do. And I'm going to be just really, really sincere and honest. In 30 plus years, I never wanted to be there. It used to be preached to us, you got to make this home. And I would say, no. I can't. Nobody can make the North home. This is nasty. But I believe God, your heart's desire was to have a people to love. And then I'm going to say something that's a little bit selfish, I guess, but a place to honestly to be loved. We desired that. And I believe after we had finished our work, God gave us what might be the greatest blessing that you'll get at the end of your faithfulness. A faithful man shall abound with blessing. Maybe getting to have the desire of your heart fulfilled. That might be one of the greatest blessings that you could have. Verse 24 says, whensoever I take my journey into Spain, I will come to you, for I trust to see you in my journey, and to be brought on my way thitherward by you, if first I be somewhat filled with your company. Just very simply, he was headed to Spain, but he would go through Rome, and he would get to be with those he loved for a while. But he was not to stay in Rome, but to go to the Jews in Spain. And so hopefully this is where our situation differs, because we really don't have any other place we want to go. All right. So, but here's what he said, I've got to go to Spain. This is what he believed he was supposed to do. He said, but by doing that, I can go to Rome, and I can see you, and I can be with you. Again, a little bit like what we did while we were traveling for those 3.5 years. Man, anywhere that we could schedule meetings that we could pass through one of our kids' houses. It wasn't to see the kids, as we got to stay there free. And so, but we would pass through, we passed through Dennis and Heather so much they built us a bedroom in their basement. So, but he said, I get to pass through and see you. Now, verse 25 through 28, we'll put these together. Got a few more minutes. He said, but now I'll go unto Jerusalem to minister unto the saints. For it hath pleased them of Macedonia and Achaia to make a certain contribution for the poor saints which are at Jerusalem. So he said, I'm going to go to Jerusalem. He said, but I'm going to minister to them. But really how I'm going to minister to them is that those in Macedonia and Achaia have given contributions for me to take to the poor in Jerusalem. Now, it says in verse 27, it hath pleased them verily, and their debtors they are. He said these folks that are sending the money to Jerusalem, they realized they were debtors. Now, what does all that mean? He says, for if the Gentiles have been made partakers of their spiritual things, their duty is also to minister unto them in carnal things. When, therefore, I have performed this and have sealed to them this fruit, I will come by you into Spain. He says, so I've got this duty I've got to do. Now, what did he have to do? He said, I've got to go and take this contributions, these money to the poor that are in Jerusalem. Now, here's what's so different about this whole situation. This is kind of outside the norm of the missionary thought processes. Normally, all the churches, we are like the mother churches. We help, Mike and Brooke in Africa. So we send money to them to be able to start churches in Africa. And there's he started 3 of them there. There's but the kind of the main one I've been to the most is in Apewu. And so in Apewu, they're to Lake. What this is really saying is that the same picture is that Apewu has received the gospel because we helped the money and finances to send to them. We sent the gospel to them. Now, what's happening here is that those churches now understand that the church that sent the gospel to them is in poverty. These people are suffering. So the churches here, these Gentiles who receive the gospel from these Jews, they receive the gospel. You know what they're doing? They say, they're suffering back there. We're going to pay our debt. We're going to send financially to them to help them. And it'd be like Apewu taking up their little bit and saying to Calvary, Calvary's in trouble. We're going to take up an offering and Mike, take this money back to America and give to the people of Calvary because they have a financial need. Boy, that's an incredible. Watch this. If you really want to know that your people that you've reached have grown spiritually, boy, that's a testimony. Paul had this thing right. He said he was a planter, but somehow or another, he must have got the gospel really deep down embedded into these folks. He planted that seed down deep in good soil because they said, we're debtors to them. We'd be dying and going to hell if it wasn't for them. They helped us spiritually. Now they have a physical need. Let us meet that physical need. So, this passage, as I say, is somewhat remarkable in that it is a side of missions that's seldom seen. This is the churches that have been reached by the missionary efforts, sending money back to help the churches that sent to them the gospel. The Gentiles had been receivers of the gospel through missionary efforts, and now they were sending financial aid to the poor back at the churches that had sent them the gospel. And this is a wonderful example of how once the spiritual need is met, that the spiritual change in us should cause us to desire to meet the physical needs of others. And really this goes back to the chapter 14 and 15 again. We ought to go back. God says if you really truly got salvation, it ought to make you want to give spiritually to others, give the gospel to others, but it also make you want to take care and provide the physical needs of others. Now, Romans 15:29 says, and I am sure that when I come unto you, I shall come in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ. This is an amazing statement, but I believe this is culminating Paul's ministry here. But this is really a testimony of his walk with God. You hear much about boldness, that we ought to be bold in our witnessing, and we have holy boldness, or should have, as we stand for Christ. This is what Paul's saying. He's saying, I came to you in the power of God, and I know it. How do you have that confidence? I'm going to tell you from my own personal life, that confidence is never in yourself. It comes the closer you get to God. The closer you are in your walk with God, the more the lack of confidence leaves, because suddenly it's not about what you can do anyway. It's not about your abilities or your talents anyway. It's what God is going to do through you. You say, how do you know He's going to? That confidence comes when the closer you get to Him, He just settles it in your heart. Folks, I couldn't have pastored a church 10 years ago, 15 years ago, if for no other reason than it scared me to death just to have sermons 3 times a week. That scared me slap to death. Where in the world do you get 3 sermons a week? How do you come up with 3 sermons a week? That literally, I'm serious. It was people. Look, this is not the first church that ever asked me to pastor. I was voted in at another church and turned it down. They voted for me and asked me to come, and no, because I couldn't come up with 3 sermons a week. I don't know what in the world I'd preach, and I love to preach, but I love to give about 3 months to get a good one. But over the last 10 years, probably more so, maybe a little over that, I don't know, more so than any other time in my life, God has given me a confidence. When I walk and pray with Him, He'll just tell me what to preach. And then I'll go sit down and it just keeps coming. And it's not me. He just tells me what to preach. And I have a confidence. So much so, this sounds terrible, I joke about it, but I really don't care if you like it or not. Because He told me what to do. So, all right, I thought sure I was going to finish tonight, but I'm not going to. I'm not going to. All right. The Romans 15:29, just that. He says, "For I am sure that when I come unto you, I shall come in the fullness of the blessing of the gospel of Christ." Amen. His walk with God led him to full assurance of his calling. And so in that full assurance, it gave him strong confidence. And in that strong confidence, he would evangelize the world, the lost. He would pioneer new fields and new churches in those fields. He would plan, but would follow the Spirit's leading above his plan. And that's another thing, that the more you have confidence in your relationship with God, when He just tells you to do something outside your plan, you got it all planned out. Folks, never let your plan supersede the Spirit of God. He would lead the people of the new churches to be financially independent of the home churches. He would lead the mission churches to be giving churches and to be a source of blessing to others. And this is not Paul that did that. This is the Spirit of God through Paul. And he said, I have assurance. I have assurance that God's doing it. He just happened to be using me. Well, Father, I pray that you bless here tonight. Lord Jesus, thank you for your love and your goodness. Lord, thank you for this book called Romans. Father, there's so much in here. Lord, truthfully, I could have taken twice as long as we've taken just to get through this. But Lord, thank you that we've gone through it. I know it's been a blessing to my soul just to study it again and to go through it again and to see new things that I never saw before. But Lord, I pray, please, that you'd help us to be more like Thee because we study your word. And we let it sink in. And we let it change us. It's not just information, but it's that which would change us and challenge us to be more like Christ. I pray in Jesus' name.